designs, working in mobile,
Yep.
any portrait landscape view. It didn't really matter. Everything seemed to be super solid. So that was really nice.
It was
Very, very good
great.
improvement.
It was. So, welcome to the Wonderful Podcast, Season 1, Episode 2. I'm Carmen, co founder and head of operations of Wonderful.
And I'm Kieran, co-founder and chief exec at Wonderful. Yeah, we're just picking up from where we left off in episode 1. If you remember, we built the platform, launched the platform, and were a little bit surprised that we didn't have charities falling all over us.
Yeah.
And again, as we picked up last time, probably not surprising with that benefit of 2020 hindsight. But we'd hit our first 3 milestones, which was very encouraging, and decided that we were ready to push that button on a bigger, more scalable, more user-friendly, better designed website than we had before, ready for some growth.
Yeah, I think at that point, we'd had really nice feedback from charities. We had a lot of charities that were using us very regularly. And we sort of, in getting that feedback, we knew more of what the charities wanted. So we knew where to steer the platform and what sort of improvements we could make to it. So it was
I
good.
think that's really important, and that's been a lesson that you learn not just through this, but through all the businesses. That, in a sense, you need to have something live. All the testing in the world is
Yeah.
great, but until you get it out there in the wild with people using it, there are features and usability issues that you just don't think about until it's actually live.
Especially when it's the same group of people testing it over and over again. Like,
Exactly.
it's like proofreading your own work. You need another set of eyes on it, and it's a lot better to have the actual people that are going to be using the platform use it and give us feedback. So I think that was really useful to have that time before we relaunched the website to gather all that feedback and data from people.
Definitely. I mean, I think the usability testing with external firms is it's very warranted. It makes an awful lot of sense that you're doing that because you get an objective feedback. But again, with this, really thinking about where we were, it was a fairly small budget. We probably couldn't have employed external testers to do a great deal. So that certainly that first few months of getting feedback in the wild was excellent. Just for things like building appeals pages and thinking about how we might do team events and all of those things that we'd sort of had a go at, but it's really hard to test with a team of a few employees as to what that's going to look like.
Yeah. I remember things like people wanted to leave emojis on donation comments and stuff like that. Things you just never think of, but when people are using it, you start to realize, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, you've reminded me of that. The issues of dealing with Unicode text in a text field and then displaying it correctly, and how the database reads that text back. I mean, don't get me started on the technicalities. It's way above my pay grade. But I remember it, on the face of it, seeming very simple, in reality proving incredibly complicated. But we got there. We did get there. We were ready to go. After a good few weeks of working with those guys, again putting them under the cosh, and you were working again late into the evenings because we were still had our day jobs, working now with the freelance developers who'd given their time and given us an incredibly good rate. Although we were paying for it, we were paying a fraction of probably the market cost to get that work done. And again, we did that thing of setting a deadline and wanting to stick to that deadline of when that site was going to be released. Still all the time working on how we start to get more charities aware of what we were doing. I mean, word was spreading, but it was still, I guess, pretty organic, pretty word of mouth. We didn't have that budget.
Yeah.
And I think, again, timing wise now, we would have been around end of 2017 towards 2018. I think we launched this new version of the website March 2018 from memory.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I think it was. Yeah. So we spent sort of the beginning of 2018 like refining it with that launch date of March in place, basically.
Exactly. And some of that work, because we were doing that migration from the old site, it was a complete migration as well, because it had been a total ground up build. So we had to get all of the data out of the existing website and into the new platform.
We've had a few of those. It is nervous times, making sure that all the database syncs up with the new website and everything's formatted correctly. But yeah.
Exactly. And also making sure that we didn't have any significant downtime. I think we did schedule some, but it was a couple of hours overnight from memory and not a lot more. And actually thinking about overnight, the day we launched that, we aimed to be live at 9 a.m. on the new website, I remember it was an all-nighter, just working literally through the night and checking everything. All of this, I think we manually checked every single charity page that was up, every fundraising page, everything, to make sure everything was displaying properly. All of the information was there.
Yeah.
Before switching over.
Which, touching on the doing well, the being well, get confused, so many different. That actually is something that I think we've got better with time, but is part of having a business and stuff. You've got to try and balance that, and try and not overstep and do that all the time. I think we're quite good and we don't have those overnighters regularly, but sometimes it is necessary.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah. No, it's too easy. We talked about it briefly last time. When you're working certainly from home as well, and you've got access to the laptop, the guys were doing their full-time jobs as well. The guys that were doing the development work for us, albeit external, they weren't doing it as part of their day jobs. So we were regularly doing the meetings, into the evenings. And people have families and people have hobbies and interests. I remember scheduling meetings after five-a-side had finished, or whatever it might be, quite rightly too. You can't be encroaching on people's fun times as well. But that did mean some long hours and some late nights. And you're right, there's got to be a balance, and figuring out how you switch off is quite important. I mean, what we... Sorry,
no, I was just going to say, touching on balance, I think that ties in quite nicely with how you sort of use yoga, pardon the pun with balance, to sort of help you with that aspect of it as well. Because I know you've been doing yoga obviously for ages, for as long as I can remember now. And I know that when you have the most stressful days, you'll often just go and lock yourself away in a room and do a practice for an hour or whatever.
Yeah, no, it is a great way. I mean, that's one of the objectives of yoga, is to do that and still the mind and kind of try and just slow down. I don't think you can, unless you're very, very dedicated and accomplished, the ability to switch off and focus only on the practice is quite a challenge. That is the practice in many ways of yoga, but the more you can slow down those thoughts and focus on the breathing through all of the asanas, through the poses and so on, is kind of the better you practice. So I do find it a really good way to try and declutter and empty the mind and focus a little bit. And also it just gives you some perspective.
For sure. And I think it's not only important for your well-being, but it also benefits like your productivity in the business as well, because it gets to a point where if you've worked so many hours, you need a break, you need to step back, because otherwise you're just not even getting anything done. Like, you need to come away from it and come back to it to actually solve problems and things like that. So I think it's really important to try and get that balance right.
That's exactly it. And it's interesting because I was chatting to a yoga teacher quite recently, and saying that I've been asked on a podcast, whether anything significant had ever occurred to me on the mat, whether I'd solved any problems, business problems, or anything like
epiphany.
That. Like that kind of thing. And my response to that was not that I can recall. And in a sense, it always felt to me that that's probably quite a good response, because it shows that you are focused on the yoga practice rather than work.
Yeah.
But interestingly, talking to the yoga teacher, what he was saying is that he's aware of many people who take a notepad and a pencil and have it by the side of the mat, and they will write down things as they occur to them. And I said, does that not defeat
in
the
a
object?
yoga pose? Or do they come out?
Quite challenging, yes.
Downward dog.
But I thought the response was quite interesting, because he was saying, but writing it down means that you can move on. Whereas if you don't write it out of your head, you carry on thinking about it through the practice. And I thought, oh, wow, I'd not really thought about it.
No, that makes sense. Like journaling and just getting everything out of your head when you wake up and stuff like that. That does make sense.
Yeah. So maybe that's a technique I'll think about in the future. But to be honest, I do try. I find, funnily enough, in terms of that sort of out of the office and away from the laptop and solving problems, occurs much more when I'm out for a run than it does on the yoga mat.
Yeah. Maybe because when you're on a run, you're almost more switched off and you're kind of on autopilot. Whereas I've not done much yoga compared to you, obviously, but I feel like with that, you're kind of focused on something. Whereas I guess with running, if you get in the flow of just running, your body's just running, but your mind can be processing other things. the fact that you've gone away and done yoga and come back to something, maybe you've had the moments after it, but had you not gone and done that yoga and distracted yourself and taken yourself away from it and focused on something else, that spark or epiphany or whatever you want to call it probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, it's definitely a reset. There's no doubt about that. It does. You do feel you come off the mat feeling a little bit like you're recharged and the batteries are full and you're ready to go again. It's great. And of course, for a runner, it's a fantastic thing to be doing because it just helps with that flexibility. Not least as you start to get older. I remember the first time I was challenged to get into a yoga pose that on face value almost isn't a yoga pose, just kneeling down and leaning back onto your heels. And the pain that caused after years of running and complete tightness in all of those muscles and ligaments and so on, it was excruciating. I couldn't do it, and I couldn't believe that I couldn't do it. And you'll often see the runners where someone will say, "Touch your toes," and you go, "Yeah," having a laugh, because you just do get really, really tight. So yeah, not only good for the thinking process, but great for balancing the running as well.
The physical effects that running has on your body as well. Yeah, that makes sense.
But so getting back to that and how that helped with some of the other stuff that was going on, we were dealing with quite a lot. We were still having this issue of can we get charities to sign up? How can we get them to sign up? What can we do with this non-existent marketing budget? And how do we address that problem as well? How do we start to get some money behind this? And we've been having conversations with potential corporate sponsors for quite a while, recognizing that we've got this strap line of do good, do well, be well. But in order to do more good, we really needed to be doing better in the commercial business. Not that the commercial business was doing badly. It's just the sense that it's a small business. Our pockets are only ever going to be so deep unless something explodes with that business. Then we had a finite resource on which to fund the activity of the fundraising platform. So we'd always set out to say we'll do this for the first £1 million as we'd kind of committed to doing, but with a view to bringing on a corporate sponsor. And again, that felt much more challenging than we thought it was going to be. We thought the message for a corporate sponsor was a hugely positive one, to be involved in this virtuous circle of people doing great things.
Yeah, I think it was similar to the same way we thought that charities would jump at the opportunity. We didn't realise that, the same as we said, like a charity is a brand, and for them to join a platform and be on a platform, there are processes that they want to go through. They have to evaluate things internally. The same for a corporate sponsor. You could speak to one person at a company that thinks this is great, but they're going to go and have to go away and speak to like 5 different departments and get approval from things. So it wasn't a fast process trying to get corporate sponsors on board.
And I think the other thing that you learn along the way is that I started off the first approaches to them thinking this is a CSR piece. I need to speak to whoever's responsible for corporate social responsibility within an organization.
Yeah.
But it soon emerged, actually, it was probably more of a marketing budget that we were looking at. And it was the marketing directors and so on that we probably needed to be approaching. So that was not a waste of time, but it was a learning exercise that you'd have conversations with some of these larger organizations and then find it's not pillar to post. It's a route you're going to have to take, but it all just takes time.
For sure. And having to explain it again to them and the whole concept again to a new department or a new person or whatever, that takes time to build that relationship.
So we'd launched the new website in March, and at that time, again, we were still struggling to get the charities on board. And you'll remember what happened because you were dealing with a charity application. So run us through that.
So in March, we'd obviously launched a new website, which was great. At that point, we were getting a couple of applications a day. I'd say on a good day, maybe 5. But 5 or 6 was probably a good point. And then I remember logging in one day and suddenly basically seeing that we had over 100 in one day, which was absolutely insane. And back then it was we've improved the process significantly, obviously years on now, but back then it was very manual and involved process onboarding any charities. It was basically me just doing it as head of fundraising for the platform. I would liaise with charities directly, make sure they say who they are, who they say they are, That was something that was always really important to us, because if you're raising money for a charity, you want to make sure the money, or if you're donating as well, is going to who they say they are. So we'd always do a lot of manual checks. I'd phone every charity, look at the charity commission data and stuff like that. So yeah, I logged in one day, and rather than have 5 or 6 to do, which would still take me a fair bit of time, I had over 100, and I had absolutely no idea what had happened. I remember thinking something must have gone wrong in the database, or we've got some sort of error. Why am I seeing this many charities that I need to process? And like I said, part of the process was me phoning charities and speaking to them on the phone. And one of them said, "Oh yeah, you guys were the money saving expert." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And basically, Martin Lewis and the Money Saving Expert had done this comparison piece on different fundraising platforms.
Yeah.
And as we were the only one that was 100% fee free, that obviously was very enticing to a lot of charities and resulted in us having an absolute huge amount of applications overnight. So I think that was like a major turning point for the platform, a very exciting one. But
absolutely,
on the corporate sponsor side of things, a bit of a daunting one as well.
Yeah, it was recognizing that money saving expert moment had happened, and what that really meant for us was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. We were processing those donations, and clearly the applications then shortly afterwards, there's a little lag between the charity being signed up and some fundraising activity happening, and then the donations starting to drop. But there was no doubt we were starting to see a hockey-shaped curve.
For sure.
I remember my main check-in point each day was opening the Stripe app, because Stripe were processing all of our donations at the time. Opening that and just seeing the numbers increase so dramatically that it would often, and often that was at the end of the day, talking about late nights and wellness and sleeping and all of those things.
Not the best thing to check in bed.
Not the best thing to do, but day job to do, and you get to that later on. I wonder how the platform's getting along, and then you go, oh my goodness, wow, what a day. And it really did absolutely explode. And you're right in saying that created the challenges of how do we deal with this, because we were at that position where we were still funding the platform entirely through that small business, with its finite budget allocated to doing what we were doing. We were really keen to ensure that existing charity fundraising pages kept going, but again, you can describe how we manage that flow of activity through the website.
Yeah, so I think basically the money saving expert created that success paradox where, it's amazing we're doing so well, but at the same time we're doing so well and we're seeing that getting a corporate sponsor isn't an overnight process, whereas donations are sort of growing and increasing overnight. That we just had to try and figure out how to combat that. And the way we did that was we'd temporarily suspend charity applications. And what I mean by that is we'd close the doors to new charities for a few weeks at a time. I think the most we did it was probably a month or two, 6 weeks, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make a point of never, ever stopping existing fundraisers from being able to receive donations. Obviously, the last thing you want to have done is created a fundraising page, have a marathon in 6 weeks, and 5 weeks into your fundraising, we suspend donations to your page. We made it very clear that we would never do that, which I think was important. And the same for any charities that were already on the platform. We weren't going to say, you can't receive any more direct donations or anything like that. But what we did have to say was, if you're a new charity, you're going to have to wait. And that sort of delay of application sort of slowed down that hockey stick curve that you were talking about, trying to basically buy us more time to get more money in to fund the platform.
Or complete that conversation
with the exactly.
Yeah. So it was very difficult, very challenging, but frustrating in some ways, because you think, well, we've got this ceiling on our impact and on our reach that's very, it's very tangible, it's there, and it feels quite low, and there's not a great deal we can do about it. We'd managed, I think, through the very nature of the platform and what it did to negotiate really good rates. Stripe, again, were super in terms of helping us with that and recognizing what they were doing, but they they also have to recognize they're a commercial organization, and they're also
and
providing
need
that
to
kind
make
of
money.
service for lots of charities as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
So, if we go along and get a rate that's very different from one of their big charity customers, then that seems unfair too. So I totally got it. This is what we can do, and we're really happy to help. But again, there's a limit on how low we can go with this kind of thing.
And it was hard as well. I remember speaking to charities and stuff, because they'd call up and say, when are you going to reopen, or email, and they all have such amazing causes that they're raising money for, that it is very hard to say, well, I'm really sorry, we just can't right now. So I think that was a really hard time in that sort of sense.
Yeah. I think there was as much conversation going on about how can we automate more this flow of registration, so that, again, because that was also a bit of a roadblock. It wasn't just the funding; it was also, there was manual due diligence that was required for those registrations, those new charities coming on board, and we were constantly refining that process to make sure that was as straightforward as it could be. That might be setting a minimum existence period for the charity before they can even start a registration, which means we know they've got accounts
Financial
filed at the
history,
Charities
yeah.
Commission and all of that sort of thing. So, yeah, it wasn't straightforward. It was really exciting. We felt like we were making a difference. We're up to millions of quid going through that platform now by that period, which was fantastically encouraging and very exciting.
I think we had the doing good element of things down. We were doing that very well. We just needed to be able to keep going.
We
did,
make
and sure that the platform was doing well as well.
Exactly. So that we needed to make sure that the business that was supporting it was doing extremely well. I think probably the reality was too well to support the predicted growth of the fundraising platform, which as I say, we'd always recognised we would need to find a corporate sponsor with deeper pockets. Interestingly, it was one of the things that was mentioned to me very frequently by people who looked at the model and said, it's fantastic. What you're trying to do here is really amazing. It'll never scale. And that was the naysayer response all the time. And again, you look at it and you do see logic in that you're going to be constantly looking for a corporate sponsor that's a bit bigger than the last one, or has deeper pockets, or revising the model to have other layers of sponsorship that become quite tricky to manage. And what does that look like?
To me, that made sense, because for me, being a corporate sponsor, as we've talked about before, that multiplier effect of you're able to help a lot of charities by helping cover card processing fees for a fundraising platform that is free for charities. But also, it's amazing advertising for any business to be putting your logo on all the emails we send out, to be on the homepage of that website, and for us to be saying, your donation was made possible because of X, Y, and Z business. So I did think, this is a great model, to be honest. But it's one that takes a lot of time to establish and grows more quickly than that time.
That multiplier effect, it's worth just mentioning that in a little more detail without dwelling too much. But we used to say to the potential corporate sponsors, you could either give £50,000 to a charity, which would be an incredibly positive and laudable thing to do. It's great. But I describe that sometimes as a passive donation. You're just giving that to the charity to support all of their great work. Again, fabulous. But by giving that money to a fundraising platform, what you're actually enabling is lots of people in your community, be they're your customers or your employees or customers of your suppliers or employees of your suppliers, all of those people that are operating in your community, living in your community and doing amazing things. You're enabling them to do that for a multitude of causes, not just one charity, but so many other different charities. And we put that in the context of, I think episode 1, we said £1 million was broadly going to cost us as the telecoms business £25,000 to £30,000. Where you get £25,000 to £30,000 in from a corporate sponsor, you've got the same multiplier effect. Yep. Instead of £25,000 to £30,000 going to a charity, £1 million is being raised for lots of charities.
And you're helping many donors, you're helping many fundraisers. It's not just charity, you're touching a lot more people along the way. And also, even just from a corporate side of things, there's a lot more eyeballs on your business as well.
Exactly.
you know, it's not just one donation that you've made. Think about every single person that is seeing that you have facilitated all those donations. So yeah, I thought it was a great model, but yeah, I think we just
and I think
took
there's
some
one
time.
other piece around that as well, in that it's not just the website and the emails, but you've got all of those we call them transactional emails, I guess, the ones where you've just created your fundraising page, you've just registered as a charity, you've just donated, you've just received a donation, your charity has just received a donation. There are lots of communications that are just going out just on a transactional basis if these things have happened.
Yeah.
If all of those contain the logo of the corporate sponsor, that's a great thing. Why? Because each of those messages is such a positive message to be reading and receiving. So, you know, you might receive an email from, say, your insurance business. You're going to open it because it's got your renewal notice in there. You're going to read it, but you don't go, "Hey, I'm
yeah,
so
it's not
excited."
a very happy feeling. Probably,
It's
oh
not
God.
necessarily a sad feeling, but there's not that exaltation that you get from actually doing something good, doing something positive, which is everything about wonderful. So yeah, we were trying really hard to communicate all those things, and thanks for winding back and pointing out the challenge that existed in doing that for us. But we finally got to that position where, you know, back end of 2018, where we're now looking like we've got a sponsorship deal, and we can rest a little bit easy going into 2019. So yeah, as we hurtled towards the end of 2018, going into another new year with Wonderful, it was amazing to see the growth that we were achieving. The charities were now signing up in big numbers on a daily basis. We'd hit that prior to the site launch, as we said, we'd hit that 100 charities.
Yeah.
That felt like a long way behind. We were now registering in big numbers daily, and I think we were up to several thousand, probably around 4,000 by the end of 2019. But a lot happened in 2019 as well. We were still facing some challenges.
Yes. I remember as well, part of the new website launch, we re-architected the platform and we're now hosting on AWS, both the application and the website. And I think you went down to an AWS summit and did an interview with them.
That's right. Yes, yeah. Another indication of the growth in popularity, and it was great to see. It was really nice to be invited along to talk about that. I think that still exists somewhere on YouTube or wherever. But yeah, we sitting down talking about that and the challenges that we'd face, because we'd gone from a self-hosted solution, which was it wasn't particularly challenging to manage, but it had its points. You know, it was still in data centers, so moving this into the cloud, into AWS architected solution, was fantastic for us and allowed us to scale and remove a lot of those worries about peaks and troughs and, you know, the concerns. Fundraising activity is not predictable. You can have an event that someone puts on that somehow gains or captures the imagination of everybody, and suddenly there's loads of traffic.
Or emergency appeals, where suddenly something's happened, a catastrophe or something like that, and a charity puts out that they need money and they need money now and as quickly as possible, and suddenly you've got hundreds or thousands of people visiting your website at exactly the same moment in time.
Yeah. But it felt like we'd solved that one at least. You know, it was very burstable, it was very scalable, it was all there and really manageable, and that was something that certainly allowed me to sleep a little bit more easily at night, knowing that we weren't going to be suddenly serving error pages because the site got too busy. But other challenges still existed.
Yeah, definitely.
And they were mainly around that cost of processing donations and the you know, the success paradox, as you described earlier, of the bigger we get, essentially the more we're going to have to keep going back to corporate sponsors and saying, can we have some more money to pay our processing fees?
Yeah, because I think even though we had the co-op on board, which was great, and obviously had solved a lot of problems, the thing is our rate of growth was still going up and up. Like, it was still, the hockey stick was still happening. So I think the nature of a fundraising platform is such a viral thing. You know, more fundraising pages obviously means more donors on the website, more charities means more fundraising pages, and it's something that will keep growing and growing. So trying to keep up with the speed of growth of the platform and keep that same momentum in terms of getting sponsorship was quite difficult.
Completely.
Because you can't just overnight say to the co-op, oh, we've just we've done 5-fold in donations of what we did. We now need 5-fold in sponsorship again overnight. Like, it doesn't work like that. So
that was always going to be the challenge, and you can recognise that. Again, it's always nice to look back and have that 2020 clarity, but it was always going to be the challenge of it's just unpredictable in nature, and therefore a corporate sponsor getting into it, quite rightly will say, I don't know what I'm getting into, or what does this look like? And we can show the figures, but it's A, non-linear, and B, who knows what's going to happen next in terms of that capturing of the imagination. And the last thing you want to do is have a platform that says, well, we can't support any more activity. It was not a great position to be in, that commitment to absolutely supporting what was up there 100%, but having to regulate that by just stopping new charities from registering every so often.
And I think through 2019 we just kept having to do that more and more, even though we thought we'd not have to do that now that we had the co-op, because the growth just kept being faster and faster. We just kept having to do that, and it kept being very sad. But
that was the way we managed the budget. And then as we got to the end of 2019, of course, going into 2020, everything changed. Because suddenly, it's not just a telephone conferencing platform that we're managing that's helping to fund or support through its staff alongside the funding from the cooperative bank, this fundraising platform that we're operating, but suddenly we're facing a global pandemic. And one of the big issues that we had at that time was that all of the staff were seconded from that telecoms platform and were providing their services free of charge to wonderful.org. And whilst we loved doing that, of course, the big problem that we had was that when Boris announced lockdown, everybody starts working from home, understandably. And the issue there is that one of the ways in which people are working from home is via telephone conferencing.
It's a good time to be in the conferencing business for sure.
Although even that had its challenges. We were providing telephony services and found that the capacity on our network was limited, and we had to expand that capacity, I think 20-fold in 2 weeks. Again, we had amazing responses from the upstream providers, the tier 1 carriers, in terms of opening up more capacity for us. Process that would have typically taken 24, 48 hours, they were doing in 40 minutes. And multiple times during a day. But this, again, created that problem for us. We were running this platform and trying to manage that process of new charities applying, dealing with the fundraisers and the help desk tickets that come in from those people, and thinking, well, something's got to give. We're going to have to figure out how we manage both of those things.
Because obviously on the telecom side of things, we were just getting more and more sign-ups, which create in turn more and more tickets that we need to respond to. People need help with things. So it was getting really hard to balance both platforms at the same time.
And I think that gave us that moment to pause, which became a really useful moment in something's got to give, but also we've got to figure out how we solve this problem that's created by the high cost of processing donations and that unpredictability, and ensure that we can scale. That just keeps coming back.
That keeps catching up with us. No matter how much we try and get ahead of it, eventually it always catches up, and it's the same problem over and over again.
Exactly. So that feels like another natural break. We finished episode 1 talking about would wonderful.org continue. It sounds like we're finishing episode 2 with exactly the same question. Super successful couple of years from 2018 through to the beginning of 2020 and COVID. Was COVID going to be the end of the platform? Would processing fees cause us to not be able to survive or grow? So those are questions that we'll be looking at in the next episode. Carmen, again, over to you to share some details of how people might subscribe, find us.
Yes, so wherever you're listening, on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, follow, drop us a like, a comment, any of those actions that are possible on whatever platform you're listening to. And if you want to email us, we've set up an email address, hello@wonderfulpodcast.com. Send us any interesting stories you've got on how you are doing good, doing well, or being well, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank
and
you
we'll
for
see
listening.
you next time. Thank you.